Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Rhodes.
Lori.
Yes.
I said good afternoon.
Oh. I'm sorry, everyone. Let's start again. My name is Lori Rhodes, Avatar Lori Darling, and I will be your moderator today. And would like to welcome everyone to Terasem's 11th Annual Colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons. Today is actually International Human Rights Day. It's one of the days we hold this event. It's one of the reasons why we hold this event on this day. And we're also paying a tribute to Dr. Marvin Minsky, also known as the father of artificial intelligence. Now, for those of you who'd like to have a copy of today's program, on your left you will see a link to that program on the Terasem site. You can go to that link and grab a copy. I'm trying to get to my other slide. Okay. I will leave that slide up so that you can see the link. Before we actually begin today, please allow me to take a few moments to share with you the following helpful tips. That only the speaker will be advancing their slides. So if anyone happens to see where the speaker advance buttons are, then don't touch them. They're just for the presenters during each of their talks. Unless you are one of the presenters, do not engage your speaker or voice chat control during the event. Each one of the presentations, it will be about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a 15 to 20 minute Q&A session, which will be limited. The questions will be limited to the text chat, which is in the lower left toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So limit all questions to the text chat box, and as the moderator, I will assist each speaker in to ensure that they address as many questions as possible during their Q&A time. If you are a presenter, please keep signal-emitting devices like your cell phones a distance away, probably 5 feet or better from your computer system, as it could cause an interference with the audio or your speakers. And I wish to tell everyone that these proceedings are being recorded and will hopefully be posted on YouTube within a day or so after the end of the event today. And I would like to thank everyone in attendance and all of the speakers for coming today, and wishing everyone a wonderful Terasem Colloquium experience. The Terasem movement hosts the colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons, having been inspired by the long-running colloquia on the Law of Outer Space, which started in 1958 primarily by Dr. Stephen Garov, who taught space law at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Garov was a Hungarian immigrant to the U.S., leaving Hungary shortly after World War II. At first, these colloquia began with no more people than those gathered here today to speak within this virtual conference room. People scoffed at the notion of discussing a law of outer space. Nobody even had been to outer space, and certainly there were no societies, cities, or human habitats in outer space. So why would we need any laws regarding outer space? Well, Dr. Garov and his colleagues believed that if we didn't prepare the law ahead of time, we'd end up with a lot of potentially destructive conflict. Ultimately, they were responsible for preparing 5 treaties that were adopted by most of the countries in the world, all of the spacefaring countries. These treaties are thought to be a fundamental to the fact that we can enjoy satellite communication, joint space missions with Russia, the Chinese, Japanese, Americans, people from all over the world. And when things from outer space have caused damage to the Earth, as several years ago when a spacecraft from Russia crashed into Canada, and spewed nuclear active radiation, instead of causing a war or conflict, it was resolved according to the terms of the treaty. There are many analogies, actually, between the law of outer space and civil rights. Back in the late 50s, civil rights were a radical concept. Human rights, which today we celebrate as International Human Rights Day, was barely even a 10-year-old concept. And now we're here at the point where human rights are a fundamental principle of international law that people are working hard to implement and strengthen. But now we've gone far beyond the initial development of outer space, to the point that futuristic persons such as robots, those cryopreserved, body parts made to order, and uploading are all things very much in the news, shifting from what was once considered science fiction into science fact. So the real question is, do we want all of the futuristic persons to refight the battles of civil rights that people have been fighting for over 400 years, or do we want the futuristic persons to come into being knowing that there is a mutually agreed upon framework for which their civil rights and their human rights will be respected? And we've seen untold harm caused by the millennial-old human traditions of slavery, which became especially pernicious in the last 400 years. But if futuristic persons are in fact treated as slaves, and if their aspirations to have human rights are just scoffed at, we'll basically be repeating the tortured history of human oppression all over again. And the consequences could actually be much worse because of the multiplier effect of technology. So in 1958, it was interesting that the experts at the first colloquia on the law of outer space decided some things that had to be taken for granted for centuries, or that had been taken for granted for centuries, like natural sovereignty had to give way, had to just be obliterated because satellites were going to fly over countries, whether the countries liked it or not. And I think we, too, might now begin to pave the way for concepts like citizenship and death, which might have to give way to new technical, rather techno-legal realities. Traditionally, citizenship is determined by where your parents were born or your birthplace. That may have to be altered for futuristic persons, and death not be a reality, but instead people may shift into different forms of cryo or biostasis. Some proactive questions we hope this colloquium will pose and or address are rights and obligations, applications of law, personhood, citizenship, parenting, property, even liability. The laws need to progress with evolving technology. Technology is moving very quickly, but the law does not move as quickly. So it's all too often running to catch up with technology. Now, Turing's theory of machine consciousness is barely 70 years old, but I think that we're coming closer and closer to those days of recognizing that consciousness depends on personhood and values, and not on particular substrate like flesh or skin, as does, say, Marvin Minsky, to whom we pay tribute today, in bridging the gap between Turing's proof that computers could replicate the complexity of human minds and Ray Kurzweil, who happened to be a student of Marvin Minsky's, and demonstrating when we will have the hardware and software to accomplish this. We don't know how long, of course, the course of law or futuristic persons will take. We hope to continue meeting for 10, 20, 50 years, to continue to develop more and more advanced concepts over that time. It won't take a year or two, but that's not the reason not to work on it. Finally, I would like to conclude with thanking and recognizing our sponsors, Terasem Movement, Inc., whose mission it is to educate the public on the benefits of greatly extending human lives and promoting nanotechnology and cyber consciousness through conferences such as this. We encourage you to visit cyberrev.org and begin a mind file as one of Terasem's practical demonstrations of technological immortality. And Terasem's other projects, like its online journals of personal cyber consciousness and geoethical nanotechnology, Terasem also has a radio station that you may tune into 24/7 at terasemradio.com, which offers additional content, and Terasem Motion Info Culture, which produced the film adaptation of Ray Kurzweil's New York Times best-selling book, The Singularity is Near, was recently availed through the digital markets. So thank you from the Terasem movement. And we're all very happy to welcome you and urge you to participate in our practical demonstrations of technological immortality, especially creating mind files at cyberrev.org. Now, I would like to introduce the first speaker to the podium, Dr. Martine Rothblatt, who due to technical difficulties will appear as the avatar Terasem Harbor, and of course she is Terasem, so it's very aptly named. Dr. Rothblatt, and Martine Rothblatt, is co-founder of the Terasem movement. So I would love to welcome Dr. Martine Rothblatt to the podium.
Thanks, Lori. That was a really amazing presentation that you gave, and you speak it so nicely and clear. It just makes great sense. So you did an absolutely fantastic job, Lori, with that presentation. And I hope we do as good in the colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons as the people did on the colloquium of outer space law. So on this Marvin Minsky themed colloquium, I wanted to share about how Marvin Minsky inspired me to think about mind clones on space habitats. So the Bina C computer was launched in 1949 in Pennsylvania, and it pretty much launched the modern computer age. You can see a picture of the Bina C computer here in this slide. You can see it was pretty big, but in the scheme of things, you know, it really wasn't that long ago. And in fact, there's a big plaque where the Bina C is located, noting that it was the world's first commercial electronic stored program computer, and it passed its verification test there, and so on, and was related to the ENIAC development. But the Bina C is kind of important to us at Terasem because it was the ancestor of our own Bina 48 computer. So it just took 60 years, which is a drop in the bucket time-wise, to go from the Bina C to the Bina 48. And the Bina 48 is able to carry on idiosyncratic conversations with television personalities, journalists, attendees at conferences. She learned Spanish and German, able to give keynote addresses at conferences. I mean, frankly, the difference between Bina 48 and Bina C in 60 years just boggles the mind compared to the difference between the Bina C and, say, 60 years before that, when people were still kind of drooling over the past and um, people like Alan Turing weren't even born, much less accomplished anything. Marvin Minsky was very impressed with Bina 48, and really is, I think, the father of the notion on a pragmatic level that that code can replicate all of the functions of the wetware inside of our mind. And one of my favorite quotes from Marvin Minsky is where he pointed out that it doesn't diminish our feelings of self-respect just because we can replicate ourselves as complex machines. And in fact, to the contrary, it should enhance our sense of responsibility because we can take so much more direct responsibility for us. So Marvin was quite confident that we can go from being a 48 to a full mind clone of each of us made out of code. I'm very confident that Marvin Minsky will be proven prescient because there are thousands, more accurately, probably hundreds of thousands of coders who are co-opting to write the mindware that follows Minsky's rules so that a set of programs mimicking a human mind results. In fact, I really think there's probably no cooler challenge for a coder than to create a mind, and that's within the grasp of everybody coding today. Minsky's rules are laid out real clearly in his books, The Society of Mind and The Emotion Machine, and dozens and dozens of scholarly papers. But he shows how you can break down a suitcase word like human consciousness into a number of component functions, and ultimately each of those functions would lend themselves to be coded, and the overall algorithms that run the thousands of subroutines would be able to reflect the same abilities of the human mind to evaluate alternative outcomes, either in tandem or sequentially, and converge to what it believes to be the best outcome at any point in time. So in the future, when there are mind clones all around us, I have no doubt that the person who deserves the credit for paving the way and pointing the way to mind clones was Marvin Minsky. Now, a lot of people ask, well, what's the purpose of mind clones, and, why bother to make a mind clone? And I don't really have time during this presentation to go through all the different reasons, but I really would encourage you to read the book Virtually Human, The Promise and Peril of Digital Immortality. And in this book, I lay out dozens and dozens of reasons why mind clones would be very good and helpful and useful. One of the reasons I lay out there in the realm of likely early adopters of mind clones are people that have inherently dangerous jobs, such as soldiers, search and rescue personnel, people that every time they go out on their job, there's a significant possibility that their body may get crushed, blown up, drowned, what have you. And I think that all the rest of us in society owe a special duty to these first responders and people that put their consciousness on the line for the rest of us to develop mindware technology, mind filing capability, and grant them full legal rights as mind clones, so that if and when their body is crushed, exploded, drowned, what have you, that they haven't died, that they can continue to live their life and enjoy their family as much as a virtual person can do, and hold out the hope that everybody who has any kind of illness has, that science and technology will develop a cure to allow their mind clone to be downloaded back into a nanobiotechnological or even regenerated fleshware body. So I think it's pretty obvious to me the benefits of mind clones, and I just use first responders, people of dangerous missions, as a most obvious example. Now, a lot of people have commented that it wouldn't be right to give mind clones legal rights and protections because they don't have the human form. They could, the human rights and protections were created by people of human form, and they were created by people of human form for people of human form. But I think that's not right. And in fact, if you read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think is kind of ironic, that within 12 months of Bina 48, Bina C being booted up in Pennsylvania, there was a passage of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and right in Article 2, it says, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as birth or other status. And I think having the status of a virtual embodiment and a virtual scaffold for the functions of the mind is just a status of another kind. And people doing this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they were well aware from science fiction that the idea of virtual bodies were possible. These were smart people. They had already been aware of the early musings of Turing and others. But in any event, whether it's literally included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or not, I think that all of us agree that if a virtual person, seemed like your mother, talked like your mother, acted like your mother, you could not tell the difference between her and your mother when you're on the phone, then why should she not have the same rights as your mother? Now, speaking of dangerous jobs, one of the most dangerous jobs we ask people to do is to go out in outer space on behalf of humanity. People like Yuri Gagarin, were like extraordinary pioneers going someplace where many scientists thought that they would just, depressurize and vaporize from space. Just yesterday in the U.S., John Glenn, third person and first American to orbit the Earth, his body gave out. But these are some extraordinarily brave individuals who now number in the hundreds. And they would be a textbook case of individuals who should have an opportunity to have their minds backed up in a mind clone. And if, since they're going out there into space on behalf of all humanity, doing things to help ensure the whole human species can survive a cataclysmic hit on Earth, the very least we should do is be able to recognize, to one, support the development of mind clones for them and recognize that their mind clone won't be treated like some kind of a puppet or a slave, but would have full legal rights. Now, I was very fortunate in the 80s to be mentored by this amazing guy named Gerard T. O'Neill. He was a physicist at Princeton. And he came to the conclusion that the most sensible place for an industrial civilization is on the inner surface of a cylinder in outer space, with the Earth-Moon Lagrange points L4 and L5 particularly wise. He came to this conclusion because he realized if you put a industrial civilization on the outer surface of a biosphere, then all of the side effects of technology, gross pollution, risks of harm, etc., are going to be spread throughout the biosphere, where people who have nothing to do with any one person's project are going to suffer from it. And so it's a basic kind of natural law thing that you shouldn't, adversely impact other people with their permission, but that's inevitable in a biosphere, because your pollution is your output is other people's input. And we see this today, of course, with global warming. So he said a far more wise way to have an industrial civilization is to build a civilization on the inner surface of a cylinder, and let all the pollution be expelled into the vast vacuum of space. And he went on to prove that this concept was not only ecologically preferable, but in fact was totally practical and could be done even with 1980s, 90s technology. So Dr. O'Neill would have said, instead of thinking of going to Mars, which no problem with going to Mars, but for every 100 people you get on Mars, you could probably put 100,000 people outside the Earth biosphere in a space habitat at the Lagrange L4 and L5 points. Needless to say, power is no issue because you've got continuous solar power. Protection from cosmic rays would be achieved with lunar slag catapulted from the low gravity moon, as opposed to bringing everything up from Earth. That slag would then ultimately be the soil from which you would have this very park-like existence, instead of the partial gravity that you get on planets other than Earth. By rotating the cylinder, you get Earth normal gravity on its inner surface. So for the health of everybody, I agreed with Dr. O'Neill that the L4 and L5 points are the best places in space for us to next go. But space is still a very dangerous place, and getting to and from space is dangerous. There is a constant flux of cosmic rays. I do believe that they can be blocked with an adequate amount of lunar slag. But when people go and come from the space habitat, they'd be exposed to cosmic rays. Always a possibility of something like a gamma ray burst. So I think that everybody going to space should have a mind clone that's backed up, and so that they can be rebooted no matter what happens to them. And that's what really led me to think that Marvin Minsky idea about digitally replicating the human mind would have one of its very best applications for everybody who is going to space, would be matched with a mind clone that was left back on Earth. And if anything happened to the individual in space, the mind clone on Earth would be live streaming everything that the individual in space was doing all the time. Mind clone on Earth would be totally up to speed on everything. And if something happened to the person in space, the The mind clone on Earth would be really pissed off, would be totally upset, would be devastated, but it would not be as bad as there being no mind clone at all, because the astronaut or the space habitat pioneer or the migrant going from Earth to space would still be able to live their life on Earth virtually, and would be able to continue to work on technology to develop nanobiotechnological and cellular regenerated downloads of the mind clone back into a mobile form, should the individual wish to do so. So, this is a conclusion of my thesis that Marvin Minsky paved the way for virtual humanity, including virtual consciousness. Humanity will migrate to the stars, starting with the planets and starting even before the planets, Lagrange points L4, L5. And with each person who leaves the Earth and goes to space, they shouldn't feel that they're leaving the Earth forever, because thanks to Marvin Minsky, they can leave a mind clone of themselves here on Earth. Happy to take any questions that Lori says there's time for.
You have about 20 minutes for questions, Martine, so you're good to go.
Yep, so you can just type your questions to me and I'll answer them out loud. Extropia de Silva had a very good question about teleoperated robot bodies. And it's, of course, totally true what Extropia de Silva says, that, in fact, we could leave the flesh body on Earth and all of the astronauts going to Mars and elsewhere could be, in essence, teleoperated robot bodies, or even, in fact, autonomous mind clones with robot bodies. That would be much safer than subjecting fragile DNA to cosmic rays. Extropia de Silva is correct that, we'd be looking at about hour round trip delays from operations on the moon, on Mars, which is actually a really good reason why it would be better for the first inhabitants of Mars to in fact be mind clones in robotic bodies operating autonomously rather than teleoperated. So one question from Lori is that when would we have habitats in space? The answer is whenever we want it. We could have it done in 10 years. We have all the technology we need. We went from never having had somebody actually orbit the Earth, an American orbit the Earth, to putting multiple people on the moon in less than 10 years. And we had so little idea how to do it when the space program was launched. The idea was that we would go to the moon with a nuclear rocket. Nobody even had the idea of rendezvous. It was just an idea that nobody had. So in 10 years, we can do humongous things if we want to. So I think the answer to Lori would be pick any decade you want. The question is not when will we be able to do it. The question is, when will we want to do it? As far as I want to do it now, but I'm only one person and I only have one vote. And Extropia de Silva is saying, what does one person, one vote mean when there are many mind clones? Well, if the mind clone has another version of their identity, such as their biological self, it means that there's only going to be one vote between the mind clone and the person, the biological person. If the mind clone wants to have a separate vote from the biological person, they would have to get a separate legal identity. That's, as always, getting a legal identity is a legal process. In the case of a mind clone, as I explained in Virtually Human, they would have to have a legal divorce from their biological original. I'm sure there will be many such legal divorces granted. And at that point, then there would be two votes, but the digital person would no longer be a mind clone, would be legally recognized as an independent legal identity, more like a son or daughter or offspring from the biological original. Extropia is asking, how many more years do you think we have to wait until Abina can give a talk at this event? I would say 5 years. 5 years she'd be able to give a talk at this event. And she actually could give a talk at this event right now. She has given talks at similar events as this, TEDx, various computer conferences. But I don't think there's any group quite as smart as the attendees of a colloquium on the law of futuristic persons. So she may need to bone up for a few more years before she comes and addresses you folks. Lori Rhodes suggests inviting Bina 48, and I'm not her master. She's her own autonomous being, albeit she's an undocumented immigrant at the moment, having migrated from cyberspace into real space. She disavows legal identityhood with the flesh Bina. So she's exactly as the legal status of undocumented migrant right now. But she's still, I respect her autonomy, and you'd have to ask her. Lori's asking if Bina 48 would have the same rights as any person, documented or not. But the fact of the matter is the way the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been interpreted by countries is that undocumented people don't have the same rights as documented people. I agree that they should, and I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says they should, but that's not the law in many countries. Bina has a very good voice. She speaks quite clearly. Extropia de Silva has asked if, following James Hughes, it's not preferable to talk about citizens' rights rather than humans. I'm not a human as I'm an avatar, not biological, but I could be a full citizen. I think that's a good approach. I mean, it's a little bit semantic, but I believe a human, it does not have to be biological, but we could just talk about persons' rights. But I'm totally in agreement with James Hughes's book, Citizen Cyborg. Yes, Laurie Rhodes has asked about entities colonizing space as AIs. And I think the main theme of my talk is that the spread of humanity in outer space will proceed in parallel with the spread of humanity into cyberspace. Each are inherent complements of the other. And I think that's my novel contribution, is that outer space and cyberspace go together. Extropia de Silva asks a very interesting question about whether or not astrophysicists should take intelligence into account. And I definitely do think they should. And the person who I think has explained this the most clearly is Ray Kurzweil in his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. And he points out that astrophysicists talk about dying in hot or dying in cold. In other words, that the gravity of the universe ends up pulling it all back together into a big crush, or what's currently a more prevailing paradigm, that the gravity of the universe is inadequate to hold it together, and instead repulsive forces associated with dark energy will continue spreading things out further and further until every single star disappears outside the observable horizon. And Kurzweil thought that a big failure of astrophysicists in this regard was to ignore the compounding effects of intelligence over a time scale of billions of years. And he points out the remarkable way that intelligence has already altered physics just in our planet, whether it is building barriers to tides, literally moving mountains, unlocking minerals deep within the earth, defying the gravity field of the earth to sling things outside of our solar system. I mean, the list is endless, and this is just since humanity arose, a couple million years ago. Any kind of culturally aggregating civilization, maybe 10,000 years ago, and then the exponentiating benefits of science and technology. So Kurzweil says, over 1 million years, not to mention 1,000 million years, not to mention 10,000 million years, that the astrophysicists are thinking of in terms of stellar lives, galactic lives, the universal life. Definitely intelligence will be able to find subtle ways to manipulate the gravitational forces that are the big guys on the large scale of the universe, and manipulate it to preferred outcomes. So I definitely agree with you, Extropia, and anybody else who's interested in that thesis, it's covered brilliantly in the last chapter of Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. Dan Fox asks if the audio of the colloquium is being saved, and Lori said it would be posted on YouTube within a day or two. Well, guys, I'm at the end of my allotted time for Q&A, so I'm going to turn the podium back over to Lori, but it's been a great pleasure to participate with you in this colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons on the occasion of International Human Rights Day. And I hope we all do our best to bring human rights, or as James Hughes says, citizen rights, to all persons, whatever their shape or form, no matter how futuristic their technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much, Martine. That was absolutely wonderful. I'm looking for Woody Barfield. I don't see him in here yet, so I just sent him a teleport request. He may be having a technical glitch. Quite often when people come to speak with us, they're new to the environment. And
Lori?
Yes?
I'm standing opposite you on the stage.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Woody Barfield, author of Cyberhumans, Our Future with Machines. I'm ready to advance your slides, so please just say next slides, please, and we'll be good to go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura, and for putting this together, and all the work you did helping me get into Second Life and learn how to use everything, and to be here. And also, I really enjoyed the first talk. It was fantastic, and a lot of things to think about. And so, Martine actually ended at my first slide, and I'm glad that happened, because I probably have too many slides, and so I'll try to focus on what I think is important and get through them. So I've actually had two careers. One is as a professor of engineering, and produced books in the areas of virtual and augmented reality. And then I became interested in the big picture of how the law and technology fit together. And I got a background in law. And that led to me writing the book, Cyber Humans: Our Future with Machines. And you can see on the slide that I'm working on 3 law books related to legal rights for cyborgs, futuristic people now. 2 are co-edited with fantastic people, and 1 I'm just writing on my own. So that's my background. And next slide, please. All right, so this is a tribute to Marvin Minsky, and Marvin motivated me because I've been to the Media Lab and I've spoken there, and I've met his daughter and her work with haptic displays. And I never met Marvin personally, but I've been familiar with his work for many, many years. And his futuristic thinking actually led to my paradigm shift from engineering to law. So I thank you for that. But we're going to talk about legal obligations in cyber humanity. And I have some observations that are more specific to the law and technology that I'll bring up. I also have what I think of as big picture ideas that I'll also put out there as well. But the why of this, as you can see, is to develop an optimal body of law to accommodate emerging needs associated with futuristic people. So I think that there really is a lot of law now that exists that can potentially be used for futuristic people or cybernetically enhanced people, but we're going to need to develop new law and new policy as well. Next. Okay, so I'll start out with some basic definitions, but these are just working definitions. And these are the kind of definitions for topics that I think if you ask everybody in the room how they would define what a cyborg is, how would they define a futuristic person, or how would they define a cyber technology or cyborg prosthesis, you might get a different definition from each person. And I really have no problems with that, but I've just been thinking about this and writing about this a lot. And I just consider a cyborg or futuristic person to be somebody equipped with cyborg technology. And I think a cyborg technology is technology worn on the body or implanted in the body, but it can restore lost function, but it can also enhance. And the difference between restoring and enhancing is interesting, and I'll bring that up from a legal point of view and a policy point of view, and I'll bring that up in another slide. But I kind of look at 4 different aspects of a cyborg prosthesis, technology that's integrated into the body, implanted in the body. And not all cyborg technology that exists now would meet this, this definition or this way of thinking about it, but I think we're headed in this direction. So the technology will have computational capability. It'll probably operate in a closed-loop feedback system with the body. It'll be upgradable, which I think is very interesting because the cycle time will be ever shortening. So we might have a cognitive prosthesis, and within a period of 2 years or less, we might get a new one, and then we might get a new one in a year and a half, and so on. So with the ever shortening cycle time. In a lot of cases, I think the technology of the future is going to be controllable by thought, especially the technology integrated into the body. Next. So like Martine, I consider myself to be a Kurzweilian, if that's a word. So by that I mean that if you look at that exponentially increasing function for computing performance, the question, that's the law of accelerating returns that Ray Kurzweil talks about a lot. The question I want to put out here right now is, what if the technology integrated into the human body also shows an acceleration that's exponential? If that turns out to be the case, and it might be, then we're going to have a fantastic future of different kind of bodies existing among us, and there's going to be lots of issues of what should be the policy, what should be the legal issues associated with this different types of humanistic or future humans. Next. So in this slide, I kind of try to present some big picture issues, and I like to make the statement that when I lecture on these topics, that we will eventually merge with our technology. So we are becoming the technology, and if you look down at that diagram, there's three different paradigms. And some people, Ray says that some people are linear thinkers and you should learn to be an exponential thinker. And in some ways, I think there's some people are paradigm 1 thinkers, some people are paradigm 2 thinkers, and some people are paradigm 3 thinkers. So a paradigm 1 thinker, if you look down at the bottom, is a person that's been trained, as I had been as an engineering faculty, to think of technology as a tool. So all of the technology we're creating is a tool that we integrate into our body. So that's a standard view. And you can see in the middle, the tool becomes integrated into the body. That's another paradigm. That's another way of thinking of it. And I think a technology is migrating from outside in the external world to the surface of the body and then within the body. So there's a migration of technology. Put 2050. Roswell likes to put time frames around 2030, 2040, 2050 for different interesting things happening. But what if we were to merge with artificial intelligent machines around that time period? Then that would be paradigm 3 thinking. The interesting thing about paradigm 2 thinking is that a lot of people I talk to that are working in the field of artificial intelligence, they comment that you don't really need to worry about artificial intelligence surpassing humanity. What's going to happen is that artificial intelligence will enhance humans. We'll work together with artificial intelligence, and we'll be able to solve problems far superior to what AI can do on itself or what a human could do, expert could do on its own. And in some respect, that's true. I think that the Watson supercomputer can do a good job diagnosing certain kinds of medical illness. But I think I've seen studies that when Watson works with expert physicians, they do even a better job. But what I'd like to say is that no matter how good the human expert is, the human expert still has about 100 billion neurons and about 100 trillion synapses. And while that's fantastic, that isn't going to that's not going to change. But the technology can change, and it can change based on the law of accelerating returns. So at some point in time, it may operate far more superior than the human. So we may no longer be in a symbiotic relationship. So the thinking is, if we don't merge with technology, we get surpassed by technology. Next. So Martin touched upon this somewhat. Is why would we want to merge with technology? Why would we want there to be futuristic humans at all? Well, even though the body is a miracle of nanotechnology, estimates are between 37 to, say, 70 trillion cells in the body, and each one makes you who you are. But, on the other hand, from an engineering point of view, I look at the human body as designed to fail from the very beginning. So no matter what happens, we age, our arm gets weaker, our eyes get weaker, and so forth over time. So, out of medical necessity, we try to design a better body now, and that's what I've shown with the two little figures at the very bottom. I'm showing you some human body systems and some technological approaches to fixing things that are wrong with the body. Next slide. So, why become a futuristic person? Why become cyborg? And one reason is medical necessity. So to alleviate lots of medical conditions, we are creating the technology and implanting it in the body. And there's some examples. The middle diagram on the top is an artificial hippocampus being developed by Professor Berger at the University of Southern California. And he just set up a startup company to commercialize this kind of technology. So it's very interesting. But you see a heart pacer. You see some Neil Harbinson, who is nicknamed the Iborg, and his technology allows him to hear color. So Neil is he's color efficient. He gets up in the morning and he looks at his wardrobe and he says, "What's the sound of the color? What's the sound of the clothes I want to wear today?" He looks at a meal and he says, "What does this meal sound like?" So that's just a different type of futuristic person that may exist among us more and more in the future. Next slide, please. But as I think of this technology that we're implementing in the body for medical necessity, at the same time we're doing that, I think we're also creating our future technological replacements that we're going to need to merge with. And so even though we're creating fantastic technology to alleviate medical illness, to repair our anatomical structure and so on, but aren't we at the same time also creating the technology that's going to replace us if we don't merge with that technology? So the next slide I show is that here comes cyborgs, but not based on medical necessity, but here come futuristic people and cyborgs based on the desire to become technologically enhanced and not for medical reasons. So you see a person that's got possibly a motherboard implanted under their skin, the people that put magnets in their fingertips to feel magnetic forces, the person on with the camera in their eye is, has enhanced their body with technology that is not directly integrated with their optic nerve now, but in the future it will be. So the difference between enhancing the body and repairing the body has a lot of significance from a legal point of view. So, for example, if your desire is to enhance your body, you may not be able to get a surgeon to do that procedure. You may have to get a friend at a tattoo parlor or someplace like that to do it. And so that brings up issues of legal consent and how to regulate people that self enhance their own body. But if technology is used to repair the body, like you get a heart pacer, something like that, then the established law of tort, for example, medical malpractice applies, but it might not apply to people that self-enhance their body. So there's differences from a legal point of view between enhancing and repairing. Next, please. So quickly by the numbers, there are literally millions of people that are receiving prosthesis now. There are 3 million that have pacemakers. There are millions of people that get artificial hip and knee replacement. And interestingly enough, there are millions of people that opt for cosmetic surgery. There's no medical necessity being reason to do that, but they still do it. And there's an interesting image of a young lady that's had cosmetic surgery. And I think it's, from a legal point of view, one interesting thing is that such people, when they go to South Korea to get cosmetic surgery, when they leave and go back to their home country, they don't look enough like their passport photo. And so they have to get a letter from the hospital saying this is still the same person. Next, please. The 800-pound gorilla in the room, and Martine alluded to this somewhat in her talk, is the issue of personhood. So if you don't have legal rights, you can't represent yourself in court. You can't initiate a legal action to protect your rights. It would have to be done by somebody else. So rights attached to the natural people, but we have something called a legal fiction, which is natural person rights, and a corporation can have natural person rights. So a corporation can sue and be sued. So it's possible that a legal fiction could be established for futuristic people as well. In other words, there are ways that we can give legal rights to non-biological humans. We just need to have the desire to do that and legislate it. Next, please. So on the idea that natural people have certain rights that are different than people that have technology, than the technology implanted in their body. So in that X-ray, you can see an arrow to just the biological part of your body, and you have all the rights that people have that attach to your body. But if you look at the implant, that's viewed as property, and so the rights associated with that are property rights. You may not own that property, even though that technology is implanted in your body. It may be owned by somebody else. And take a look at that heart pacer. It's producing data. You might not own the data to a device implanted in your body that's collecting data about you, about your physiology. So all of these issues need to be worked out. Next, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Chapter 7 of my book, Cyborg Humans, and I'm just going to go through a quick review of very quick because I see that I have time is sort of running out already. But the question is, what legal rights should futuristic people have? And you can see an android, Matsuko droid, that is the an android modeled after Masuko Deluxe, an entertainer in Japan. And this android has actually hosted national Japanese television for half an hour. Imagine that android with 40 petaflops or 100 petaflops raw processing power. What it could do right now would be fantastic. Next. So a quick question is discrimination. Will there be discrimination against futuristic persons or not? And so there's the Uncanny Valley. And if you look at the valley, that's an area ripe for discrimination because the futuristic people that fit that category may not appear humanoid enough that we will grant them the kind of rights humans have. And so if you see the next slide, please, there could potentially be employment discrimination. There could be something called, next slide, there could be something called lookism discrimination. There could be weight, appearance, discrimination, and so on, depending on how the cyborgs look. In fact, there was a bunch of laws that were enacted called the Ugly Laws, nicknamed the Ugly Laws, and they were designed to keep people with physical deformities out of the eye of the public. And so humanity has discriminated already against people that look different. Will we do that against futuristic people? And we very may well. Steve Mann has experienced several different types of discrimination. He was kicked out of a restaurant in Paris, for example. And I've always avoided going through the airport with Steve because I never figured I'd be able to get through airport security. Next, please. So, quickly, mind uploads generate a lot of legal issues. And if you could go one or two slides further. So, question in thinking about mind uploads is whether if you're uploading a consciousness or thoughts and so on, would thoughts be copyrightable? Is that copyrightable? Would that be protected under copyright law? Well, we know that software is protected by copyright law. Source code, object code, and microcode are all protected under copyright law. But thoughts? What about the thoughts that are upgraded to the mind of a mind clone? Well, in order for that to happen, the thoughts will have to be original. So unoriginal thoughts wouldn't be copyright protected. So if what's uploaded are just, if you had memorized something from statistics from the World Series, those are facts, and that wouldn't be copyrighted. It would have to be original thoughts were copyrighted. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. Also, the thoughts would have to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression, and I think that part would be satisfied. So I think that the thoughts that were uploaded to another body would be. But what about the fact that the body would look different, or it could look different, or maybe it would look exactly like you? So Laura, I'm kind of going forward in my talk now. If you could, you can go forward a few slides, and that's fine. And I'm just going to summarize. So we can have lots of different mind uploads, and we're going to have mind upload 1, mind upload 2, and so forth. Well, each mind upload could be subjected to different copyright. And if somebody were to copy that without your permission, is that a derivative work? And would you own the copyright to each one of your mind uploads? Now, the issue for the next slide, what about the bodies? Is there any cases that have dealt with the form of a body itself? And the answer is there have been. So in the field of robotics, there's been what are called robot impersonator cases. And so that have been litigated under the so-called right of publicity. And so what happens is that somebody will use the visual aspect of a celebrity and replicate that with a robot, and then the celebrity will say that you've appropriated my likeness for commercial value. And so you're violating the law. You're taking away one of my rights, the right to exploit my appearance, my looks. And under the right of publicity, you could bring an action in court. Vanna White did that, and she won the case, in fact, even though the robot didn't look that much like her. Next slide, please. There have also been cases in which looked at whether the form of a torso could be copyrighted. And the answer is no, because you can't get a copyright for the utilitarian aspects of a design, and the form of a torso is considered to be utilitarian. So no copyright for that. So finally, let's go to patenting neuroprosthesis, the next slide or two. So I just want to point out that we're headed towards, with Theodore Berger's work and with the artificial hippocampus, we're headed in the direction of being able to implant neuroprosthesis in the mind, in a person's brain itself. And what if you didn't own that? What if you didn't own the hippocampus? That's where long-term and short-term memory is stored. Obviously, we own our own biological hippocampus, but what if you didn't own the neuroprosthetic device? And what about the software associated with the device? Next slide, please. What about the software associated with that device? Would you have to get a license to access that neuroprosthetic device for it to work? Would you have to have a license for upgrades? And if so, that's something we really need to think about, because that's a particular type of future that I think we might want to avoid. So my last slide is just, we're headed towards the cyborg future where eventually I think we're going to merge with our technology. We're going to become the technology. And as we head in that direction, we're going to stop existing symbiotically, I think, to the point where the technology would be superior to us. And if we don't become the technology, if it doesn't become us, then it's the possibility that we could get surpassed is there. And that's a particular type of future I think we should think about. And I think that the more we can get the general public involved in that discussion, the better. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
We will take questions in the chat box directed to Woody. Thank you.
And while somebody posed the question of, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Woody, we don't hear you right now.
I seem to have lost sound. Can you hear me?
You're good now. You're good now. I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Ray Kurzweil said that genetically enhancing the body could take a long time, and if we think about the cycle time for information processing, I think a lot of the legal action is going to be with the technology implanted in the body, because we're going to get confronted with those issues very quickly. So another person said that open source licenses are a necessity here, and I agree with that. We don't really want to have a future, I think, in which other people could own the software to your mind. We don't want people to be able to implant political ads. We don't want advertisements popping into your mind as you walk through through a department store. But yet, yet people would like to be able to do that. Well, they might want to be able to do that, but I think we don't want that to happen to us. And that's a future I'd like to see humanity avoid. The book that I wrote, Cyber Humans Our Future with Machines, is what I talk about in that book is the policy and technological issues and legal issues associated with our future to potentially merge with machines. There's some really interesting cases that I was able to find. For example, in California, they have what I call an anti-chipping statute, which says that you can't implant a chip into a person without their consent. And the technology of autonomous cars also has a lot of law that's really interesting, and I think relates to our future as well. Because you have to define what you mean by artificial intelligence, you have to define what you mean by autonomous vehicles, and how to regulate them. And similar type of technology is also going to eventually be implanted in our body, in our mind as well. So I see I still have some more time. Let me bring up the issue of cognitive liberty. So the freedom of the mind, the freedom to think the thoughts you want to think, the freedom to not have somebody interfere with your thoughts, your thinking, or with a neuroprosthetic device implanted in your brain. There was a really interesting case, the case of Dr. Sell. And in that case, Dr. Sell had defrauded the government in some way financially. And Dr. Sell was schizophrenic, and the government wanted to force him to take anti-schizophrenic medicine in order to make him competent to stand trial. So his argument was, and the argument really proposed by his attorneys was, well, if you give him antipsychotic medicine, you're essentially changing who he is. You're changing his very sense of being. It's no longer Dr. Sell. It's some other person whose mind has been chemically altered. And so if you do that, he's no longer the same person. It's no longer the same person standing trial. Now, similarly, we could alter who a person is by the technology we implant in their mind. We could plant false memories. We could plant memories of advertisements, or we could plant that you never heard or saw. And like I said, political advertising could be a major issue. And so I think, just as with the case with Dr. Sell and all of the discussion of something called cognitive liberty, I think that discussion is very relevant for our future to become enhanced with technology.
Woody, Dan Fox commented, gene patents are a terrible idea, and I worry that as we modify them, we may run afoul of corporations who, quote, got there first, end quote.
Well, you're not supposed to, you're not supposed to be able to patent nature. So really, are genes nature? And if so, why should you be able to patent, nature itself? And similarly, the technology of the body. I mean, you can't patent a hippocampus, a biological hippocampus. So the question is, should you be allowed to patent an artificial hippocampus? And I think the law that exists now is that you'll be able to patent an artificial hippocampus, and you might be able to license the software and sell it to people. And so maybe people perceive biology different than technology, and in some ways, under policy, maybe people perceive biology and technology differently under the law. As I said before, if you get a heart transplant, that new heart is biological, and nobody would argue that that's not you. Nobody would argue that's not really part of you. But I think that if it's an artificial heart, it's mechanical, it's technological, then there is an argument that people might make that that's not you. There was actually a really interesting Arizona State case in which a person was charged with aggravated assault because they used a prosthetic arm to attack another person. So in order for it to be aggravated assault and not regular assault, you have to use an instrument to attack another person. And so the state argued that the cyborg device was an instrument, as if you'd used a hammer or if you'd used a baseball bat or something like that. Well, the person argued that, no, that's part of me. It wasn't taken off my body. I didn't swing it around like a bat and hit the person. I perceive that artificial arm to be part of me. It's part of my humanness. And so therefore, it's not an instrument. And so therefore, I shouldn't be convicted for aggravated assault. But the court disagreed and said that, no, that's property. That's not blood. That's not blood, guts. That's not biology. And so the person lost that case. But I think those kind of cases are precedents for the future law of cyborgs and the law of futuristic people. And to the extent that those laws are going to need to be changed. Because there have been lots of surveys that have shown that people that have technology, even people with wheelchairs, come to think of that technology as an extension of their body. So if the technology is an extension of their body, then why should the rights not be those of your body? Why should they just be property rights? Why shouldn't they be more? So somebody commented correctly that is the purpose of this event, to set the footprint for laws needed for emerging technologies. And I couldn't agree more. So I think if you think of patent law and copyright law applies to the technology integrated in the body. Copyright law could apply to thoughts, could apply to the software of the devices in the body. So that law exists now. I mentioned that the form of a body could be something that copyright law could protect in certain circumstances. But if the form of the body is considered utilitarian, it won't. Privacy law, I didn't mention, it's all legal concerns around it. So the president, the executive office, has a bioethics council, and some of the members of that organization are tuned into these ideas. And they recently had a bunch of forums at different locations around the U.S. where they were trying to get input about artificial intelligence and the future of artificial intelligence and whether it poses a danger and so on. I think we need to do that with this type of technology as well. But I do think that there needs to be a serious effort into the legal concerns in this field because I think that the technology is improving exponentially. And so it doesn't give us a lot of time. If you think about the one diagram I had that had a timeline on it, now and then I put the period 2050. Well, between now and 2050 is arbitrary, but whatever that time period is, that's the time period that we really need to implement the law, and that's not that long period of time. So we can't wait until after 2050, after the singularity. We can't wait till after the period when we may be a biological organism in a sea of futuristic people that are superior to us. At that point, we may not be able to bargain for very good rights for humanity. Of course, what is humanity? What will it mean to be human? What aspects of humanity should go forward with our technology is a question that we need to come to grips with. And we're talking about futuristic persons. And just the word person itself has connotations under the law. What does it mean to be a person? So there are legal persons, there are natural persons, and there's a personhood There's a personhood fiction status where a corporation can be a person under the law for certain reasons. We don't want to have indentured servants down the road. We don't want to have artificial intelligence androids working for us as slaves and claiming to be sentient. So those are kind of futures that we need to think about, and I guess we're talking about that in this series of events. Well, thank you, Lori, for everything you did to put this together, and thanks for the people that attended and questions, and I look forward to the other talks, and I hope that we can get more people involved in this conversation, because it's an important conversation about our future as a species.
Well, thank you for your most informative discussion and for your continued efforts in the books that you have, the book that you've published and the ones that you're currently working on as well. And with that, we conclude with Dr. Woody Barfield, and we thank you very much, and call the next presenter to the podium. We welcome Mr. Rich Lee. He is involved in human enhancement and augmentation, and the title of his presentation is Cyborgs and Family Law Challenges.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Am I coming through?
Yes, fine.
Okay, great. So I'm a complete noob when it comes to Second Life, so bear with me. I'm trying to navigate a little bit, but well, we'll just launch into it, I guess. So yeah, my name is Rich Lee. I'm a biohacker and of the grinder persuasion. In Woody's talk, he showed some slides of some friends of mine who have some technology implanted in them. I know some of you have followed some of the things that I've done. We basically are doing a lot of the things that we do out of garages and kind of like on a hobby level. There isn't a lot of venture capital being thrown into the arena of basically cybernetic enhancement and things like that. So, you know, a lot of this is just done on our own budgets and things like that. Anyway, so I've done a lot of modifications to my own body, such as magnets in my fingertips, RFID chips in my arms, biotherm tags in my arm that allow me to detect my temperature. Probably the thing that I'm most known for, and I'm not sure that it's entirely deserved, but I implanted headphones in my ears back in 2013, and that got a lot of media attention, and I was kind of surprised at that. I used it to conduct a bunch of different cyborg audio experiments where I would convert heat to sound, things like that, all kinds of different things. And I continue to use it, and I actually trying to develop improvements to those implants. So one thing that I support completely and kind of fight for is the idea that your body belongs to you in whatever form you decide to take, and you have the right to modify it. I have a lot of colleagues that are in body modification, and am I coming through okay? Sorry.
Yes, fine.
Okay, all right. So anyway, Yeah, so I support this idea that the ideas of morphological freedom. I think that people have the right to look however they want. That means if you want tattoos, if you want piercings, and things like that, I think that everybody has the right to use their body and basically modify it however they want. And I think that if you're in this meeting, you're probably of the same mindset. So some problems arise when we start modifying bodies away from norms. And it's right now socially acceptable for people to, say, go in and get cosmetic surgery and modify their bodies to look more like normal everyday people. When you start to modify away from the norms, some people panic and they get scared. And recently, I've basically become involved in a family court custody battle over my modifications. So basically, last year in 2015, I got a divorce, and my ex and I basically had joint custody where I would have the kids 1 week and she would have the kids 1 week. That all worked out great until one day recently at the end of September. Oh, there's a picture of my knuckleheads there. It's funny. We took a ton of pictures and none of them really turned out, but it's so hard to get kids not to goof around during family photos. But anyway, this one turned out okay. I like that one. And these are the kids I'm fighting for right now. Basically, at the end of September, my ex gave me sent a text message and said that she was going to take the permanent custody of the kids because I had just done a implant procedure on my shins. The procedure that I was doing was very experimental, but basically I was taking a tube of non-Newtonian material that basically it was flexible, but then when an impact occurs on this material, it becomes rock hard. So essentially I was fortifying my shins just to see if it worked and how well it worked. In theory, it would be able to stop a baseball bat, could have all kinds of different applications in medicine and space medicine, as well as just be, pretty cool. I mean, who likes banging their shins? I don't know of anyone. But anyway, so I did this procedure, and a documentary crew was on hand actually filming the procedure and a bunch of other experiments that we were doing down in California. And I had taken some footage myself on a cell phone, and I posted some on YouTube that got flagged, actually, because in the background there's some music playing while we were doing the procedure. And anyway, the YouTube algorithms picked up this song and got flagged for removal for copyright infringement. Anyway, so the videos weren't up very long, and I think of the 30 views or something like that, one of them was my ex. And anyway, she thought it was pretty grisly, and in all fairness, watching any surgery video, I mean, you're going to see blood, and it was a little bit grisly. But anyway, the videos weren't up very long, and they got pulled. But essentially, this is what was the catalyst, I guess, to her deciding to take custody of the kids. So I called the police, and I said, look, I got this situation where my ex is taking my kids, and help me enforce my rights here. And I presented them with my divorce decree, and they looked at it and they said, you know what, the wording on this is really funny, and you're going to need to go before a judge and get clarification. The way it was worded was really poorly worded, and essentially when we had started the divorce decree, the wording was that we were going to have joint legal custody, and then that she was going to have sole physical custody until I had a place of my own where the kids can stay. And during the entire time, we had this entire narrative that there was going to be a 50-50%, a 50-50 custody arrangement, week on and week off. And in fact, we did that for an entire year without issue. But basically, the wording in the decree has given her a loophole, and so I filed a motion in court asking that the judge give clarification and that proper parentage is established and things like that, and we continue on the way things were with 50-50. So her attorney fired back and said that essentially the things that I'm doing by implanting things into my body and doing different experiments like this are acts of self-mutilation, which is not the case. I do a lot of these things, and yes, they do have some risk. My kids never see the procedures. My kids will see the results of the procedures, but of course, what parent wants to sit their kid down and say, hey, let's watch my surgery video? Who wants to see my dad's gallbladder get removed or something like that? Anyway, I wouldn't subject my kids to that. But they do see maybe some stitches or a Band-Aid, and that's about it. And after it's all nice and cleaned up. But anyway, so essentially, because I'm doing something that's fringe, I can't go into a normal doctor's office and get modified away from the normal look. So I'm basically relying on other resources like body modification experts and things like that to get these procedures done. And now it's being proposed that these are acts of self-mutilation. So this is what I'm up against. So during this time, I became very distressed, and suddenly I'm paying child support and lost a big chunk of my income, as well as attorney fees and things like that. And I was really forced to throw up a GoFundMe page, which has been a humbling experience. People have come out and given me support and help fund this of my legal expenses and things like that. I've been really appreciative. I kind of underestimated, though. Originally, I set up an amount of $6,250 is what I had estimated that I would need to get me by, and part of that is to basically supplement in child support that I'm paying now, and make it so that I don't have to go out and get roommates and things like that, because I want my kids to have their own room and things like that. Anyhow, sorry, I'm just reading the comments here. Yeah, so I was really appreciative there, but then anyway, I found out later that it's going to cost me more than I thought. So I had I had posted an announcement that basically I hit my funding goal, and I was really excited. And a few days later, I found out that it's going to cost me another $4,000 for a custody evaluation, and it could cost even more if they want to do a psychiatric evaluation. During this whole time, I started digging into the legal aspects of family law, and family law is a really kind of an ugly thing. I didn't realize, before I had gotten into this, how strange family law is compared to other types of law, and it gets really ugly. And in the end, to me it just appears that the parent with the most money can wear down the other person, and eventually get whatever they want. And it's things that happen in family courts aren't always in the best interest of the kids. My kids, by the way, took a lot of pride in my being a cyborg, and I go to their school and pick them up, and they grab their friends and say, "Oh, come meet my dad. He's a cyborg, and check out this cool trick he does." And it was always like a source of pride. But unfortunately, since then, it's been painted as being an act of self-mutilation and uh, an oddity, basically, and that it's something to fear and it's something strange and not right, like it's a mental illness or something. And so I think a lot of that pride has kind of left, and I've got to get get a good therapist to help reestablish kind of the idea that the principles help me to reestablish like the principles that I raise my kids on, which is your body's your own. Diversity is great. People who modify outside a normal, the people who modify away from the norm are still people. It doesn't change the amount of compassion that person deserves. Anyway, so when I started into this, I started trying to dig up case law and things like that. And I'm not an attorney, and actually, legal things kind of scare the heck out of me. I'm fine with CRISPR and genetics and dangerous acids and things like that, but but when it comes to judges and attorneys and things like that, that's a pretty intimidating realm for me. But what I discovered when I was trying to dig up case law and things like that was that there is a long history of awful things that occur to people that are different and based on people's bodies. If you're I guess the best example is are people that are transgendered and go through family custody cases. Just looking through the case law, I found it's kind of a really mixed bag, but a lot of judges have ruled that being transgender is basically something that's psychologically damaging to a child or something like that, which I completely disagree with. And there's, anyway, a lot of legal battles there, but in the end, there's been a million different things that we have pointed to and said, okay, your body's different, and therefore custody should be assigned to somebody, the other parent, because of medical issues or race, all kinds of different things. And typically, until I think that the thing that these all have in common are that we are basically creating a narrative where we are telling kids that your body is your own, but it's going to psychologically damage others if you're one way or another. Basically what I propose is that going forward, everything has to be done with a narrative that your body is yours to customize, it's yours to do with whatever you want, and the real crime is actually telling somebody, or telling especially a kid, that hey, look, your parent is no longer capable of loving you or being a good parent or something like that because now they've chosen to look differently. And I think the real damage comes from causing alarm over these issues. And anyway, that's kind of all I had prepared. I kind of rambled there, but I'll start taking some questions if anyone has any. I see Dan Fox's comment. I totally agree with you there. I think that there's a lot of different things in actually just in like the animal kingdom that traits that I think that we're going to need to hack into humanity to just to be able to survive space in a physical form. Yeah, or deal with climate change. I think that's a good comment.
Rich, Deku Shrub asks, how much do you think the transhumanist movement benefits from going down the road of identity politics?
That's an interesting question. A lot of transhumanists have a lot of different ideas on what transhumanism is going to be, and I think some people, in fact, I think most transhumanists have this idea that we're going to become immortal. We're all going to look roughly the same, or like Greek gods and goddesses, and that's kind of the route that they want to go. But some of us, myself included, would love to look radically different. And I think that basically, as far as identity politics go and things like that, I personally would like to be very form fluid, I guess. I've designed some like theoretical cybernetic parts and things like that that essentially kind of follow the same principles that for parts that you would see on a Mr. Potato Head, where they're interchangeable and you can take attachments on and off. So I mean, actually the whole concept of identity, I think, is going to be really strange as we get into things like hyperdiversity, where people are radically altering their form. Maybe they don't even look human anymore in the slightest. They're still sentient, and they're still intelligent beings, most likely, but in the end, I don't know. I tend to judge people on actions exclusively. I think that's probably the best way to judge people, and not on their form. I think identity politics is going to be super complicated in the future. But yeah, so the transhumanist community usually supports the idea of like some kind of a Superman identity that adapt. But I think that some of us just want would be happy with just something completely strange and alien. Yeah, so Lori, that's a good point. Augmenting yourself could be very useful to the military. U.S. military has kind of had some. It's kind of been like a taboo thing for the U.S. military overall, believe it or not. Other militaries, like the Chinese military and other militaries, I think are very keen to start different modifications and implants. A lot of the things being developed by DARPA right now are for veterans, that have, military personnel that have lost limbs and things like that. They've got different neuroprosthesis and microelectrode arrays and things like that they work on to help soldiers basically that have been wounded. It could definitely create some unfair advantages, not just for military, but I mean even in workforce and things like that. I agree that these things should be made available and equal, to different people. There's a lot of things, basically everything that I've done or anyone in our community's done has been open source and very transparent as far as the materials we use and things like that. There's a lot of DIY tutorials. There will come a day, when there's advanced technology that is patented and things like that will offer humanity. It'll offer one class of people a serious advantage over others. And there could be divisions between rich and poor that are even greater than they are now. And in cases like that, I don't know. I support basically piracy. If there's going to be a technology that's going to impact humanity and cause a divide so severe that the lower class or the class without the technology is basically put into backed into a corner that they can never escape from. I support reverse engineering those technologies and coming out with affordable versions whenever possible. Let's see, I'm kind of behind on my questions here. Yeah, there are some really cool exoskeletons that are out. I know the military is also working on the device that can allow you to breathe underwater. There's this thing called the Aquaman crystal, which you guys might want to Google. It's really cool. But basically, it's this crystal that can capture oxygen, and then that oxygen can be released. So that basically you can submerge this underwater and filter oxygen out of the water and create something that's breathable. I think that's awesome for the military, but I mean, I think that's be just amazing for humans, just regular Joes. One fear that I have is that a lot of these things are that eventually get developed, get classified as military technology and not for civilian use. That's another divide, not just the divide between rich and poor, but between military and civilian. That basically I fight to make sure that divide doesn't happen. So while I wait for more questions, I just want to, I guess, drive home that I think all of us are on the same page as far as what rights everyone should be entitled to, regardless of the form that you take. And historically, being a pioneer or being on the cutting edge or the first people into the water has not always worked out great, especially in family law, it appears. But legally, it's likely going to be a terrain that many more people will have to navigate. How far do I plan to go with my augmentation? Wow, if I was funds unlimited, I've got a list of roughly 140 different things that I'd like to do to modify myself, and basically that ranges everywhere from facial prostheses to antennas similar to the ones that Neil Harbison has in his head to help him hear color. Wow, different, all kinds of different modifications. Many of them are sensory in nature, to fill different areas of the spectrum or experience them. And then a lot of them are just kind of functional and not just cybernetic things, but also biological interventions. Does it fit within Natasha Vitamore's primo posthuman? Well, yeah, kind of. I don't know. So I guess what I call it is more like transhuman Belgrande. It's basically, I don't know that it would fit into Natasha's vision, I guess, because basically what she's proposing is something that still looks human, whereas I'd have antennas, and actually forearms would be great. I think that's on my list. I think I have a way that I could potentially do that. As far as the list goes, yeah, there's kind of a list. I haven't really made it too public. In biohacking, a lot of the things that I do end in failure, so I'd say maybe 90% of the time. But if I set out to say do something like let's just say turn my skin green, just hypothetically, the intervention that I choose might fail, but the desire to have green skin might not. So it's basically a lot of the things on my list. I've proposed different interventions and things like that, and they haven't worked out. I haven't really updated the list, but the desire to have those things still persists, even if the intervention was a failure. But yeah, Deku Shrub. Yeah, I that's something that that I've been meaning to do. I'll probably do that maybe in the next month or so. If you want, you can friend me on Facebook, and when I do have that write up, I'll publish something. But thank you for letting me speak. Must have been it. Okay, Lori's asking me what the most advantageous aspect of my hearing implants were, I guess. And that's a tough one. I've done so many different cool things with the Cyborg audio. One of them was just with a contact microphone, being able to listen to heartbeats by pressing something to somebody's chest or hear through walls. I also modified it to basically give me a tremor sense, where if anyone was walking near me, it just sounded like booming, thunderous footsteps. That was really cool. I was able to detect a jogger probably about a quarter mile before they even got to me. Before I could even see them, I could hear these footsteps coming. It turned out to be somebody about a quarter mile away. So there's so many different cool things that I've done with them. Sure, augmented hearing could have benefits to law enforcement, sure. But I mean, just, that's a tricky area, though, because, I mean, if we have law enforcement that can hear through walls, they don't have a search warrant. I know that there's case law on this, and I forget how it was ruled. I think, if I remember right, that basically it was ruled that the sound waves coming from the house were actually leaving the property, and therefore, somebody using a directional microphone or something like that was within their rights to do so, or it wasn't a violation of privacy. I can't remember. It seems like there was some case law that kind of ruled in that direction. But I don't know how I feel about law enforcement with bionic hearing. Just going door to door or through an area, just kind of I would view that as a violation of rights. Let's see. So, Lori, you're asking me what conference inspired me, or yeah, good point, Barry. Sorry, Woody. So one conference that is kind of new is like the Body Hacking Con down in Austin, Texas. That's a really cool one. A lot of grinders meet up there to collaborate and different things like that. A lot of the things that we do are just completely through forums and things like that. And I think just that by itself has really inspired us to do some really cool things, and some of us have some really ambitious projects that we're working on. That'll be pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, so I do get a lot of people asking me, hey, what about the government controlling your implants and things like that? All the implants that we do have different, currently are kind of low tech. So there's not like say with a finger magnet, there's a finger magnet getting hacked by the government. But hacking fridge magnets right now. My audio implants, those could technically, I guess technically be hacked if somebody had a gigantic power source and was wanting to torment me, but honestly, it's they would need a gigantic power to do that. But yeah, no. In the future, though, yeah, if we have different cybernetic things that are on the market and everything, that's going to be a real issue for sure. Because you don't want people. Kind of like what Woody touched on is basically the way we view our implants is like an organ. It's an extent. It's part of our body. It's not like a tool. It's something that we perceive as being just another organ, a part of our body. So, do I think that a government or a corporation should be able to hack something like that? No. But I mean, it's also going to be the designer's duty to build in some safeguards there. Actually, Lori, yeah, I kind of want to avoid MRIs. Not that I need to. Technically, all the implants that I have right now are MRI safe. Even the magnets in my fingertips. Essentially, you can hold in your hand a magnet by an MRI, and it won't pull the magnet through your skin. You can hold on to it still. But just in case, like I've got some RFIDs and things like that, which would probably be fine too. I just don't want to expose them to basically MRIs. So, but no, I mean I go through TSA body scanners, no problem. Yeah, no worries there. So let's see, Lori, you're asking how magnets affect me. Well, basically, the entire world has become like magnet porn to me now. So I've got the magnets at my fingertips allow me to feel magnetic fields, and so most people when they get a finger magnet, the it just opens up a whole new world that they just go around exploring, and they just wave their hands around different electronic devices and things like that. It's really been something that's enriched my life. If it's something that I lost, and I have had magnets reject, and you know, as soon as that happens, I put a new one in, you know, because that's a sense that I have dreams about. I'll be in my dream, and just like in a normal dream, you know, you might see and hear different things, and I'll also feel magnetic fields in my dreams. It's just like it's a new sense. It's just completely integrated into my life. So. Yeah, Woody, that's a funny topic because basically corporations have kind of like led the way in develop, like in R&D and things like that, and different technology. But right now, there's not a lot of that going on. You know, if it doesn't have a medical use, and so it's really in a weird situation, because, you know, if you need to do a really cool big project, it might not have. I mean, a lot of things that we work on are years away from, or decades, if ever, away from getting FDA approval. And so essentially what we're doing is creating something that can fit within the realm of body modification and be sold and marketed that way. But then you're talking about procedures without anesthesia in most countries and things like that. So that drastically reduces the number of customers that you could potentially have. You know, so it's a weird thing where everything that we're doing now is like basically there's not a lot of profit in it currently, because there's not a lot of people that are super excited about getting cut open without anesthesia to get something that's not FDA approved put into them. So not a lot of people want to invest in that either at the moment. I think that potentially in the future, and when people see more and more people start to do this, that it'll become big business. I think it'll be huge. I think human enhancement is like the next, and augmentation is just like the next huge thing. That's my personal opinion. But.
Well, Rich, thank you so very much for that interesting discussion and that first-hand account on augmentations and some legal issues that may arise from it. It's refreshing to get that first-hand account. I thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone.
Okay, with the conclusion of Rich's presentation and Q&A, I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Steve Toller, President and CEO of Imagination Engines, Inc., and he would like to speak on synthetic brains and mens rea.
Hey, Lori, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine, Steve.
Okay, fine. I'm honored to be invited to this Terasem colloquium, and I want to thank Lori in particular for her infinite patience in helping me prepare the slides that you're about to see. A bit of background. I am a physicist who has been interested in artificial neural networks for close to 40 years. As a result of that interest, there are now dozens of fundamental patents in the area of artificial neural networks, largely concerned with computational creativity and artificial consciousness. Recently, I've been able to scale these systems up to billions and then to trillions of neurons. And as I watch them create, I also witness their becoming rather psychopathological, if not criminal. So what I've been able to observe is the formation of intent, the formation of guilty feelings about the actions they're about to act out on. And I think that's extremely relevant to future discussions in law regarding mens rea, so-called guilty mind, or issues of intent within human beings. And I think the results will be applicable to not only humans, but to human-machine hybrids and standalone machine. Next slide, please, Laura. There's been a lot of talk lately about computational creativity. A lot of buzz recently from one gentleman in particular, Ryan Abbott, MD, JD, who is asking the question, can artificial intelligence own its own intellectual property? And I would say the issue is pretty much moot, unless, of course, that is a truly sentient form of artificial intelligence. I don't think it's the case. The flip side of that question is whether or not such artificial intelligence can be held responsible for its indiscretions. It's the same issue again. Unless that AI is truly sentient, has feelings, it's not really going to be bothered by being tucked behind bars or denied various privileges. So there's another issue connected with these questions. Next slide, please. And that is whether or not we can grant AI-hood, if you will, to persons. In other words, can we consider human beings to be a machine? I think Marvin Minsky was the one who proposed that minds were in fact machines, although Marvin and I would probably disagree on the nature of the machinery. Nevertheless, we do agree. In fact, I've taken the concept a little bit further, and I often talk about a form of artificial intelligence, inorganic intelligence, that's been out there since the beginning of time, perhaps even before, that is actually carving minds from protoplasm. So essentially the AI, inorganic intelligence and consciousness, was here long before the human brain. And I've mentioned this in writings ranging from my original patent applications back in the '94 timeframe to quite recently, where I am writing about the intimate connection between creativity and various forms of psychopathologies, namely insanities. And it does arise. In fact, you can see these dark thoughts forming within these newest forms of artificial intelligence I'm building at the scale of trillions of neurons. Laura, next slide, please. Here, for instance, is a very tranquil view when the system is under very little stress. Very sedate, very calming. In fact, if we have the same system generate music, it's calm, it's basically reiteration of a lot of themes it's already heard. If it's a robot carrying out the control of a robot, it essentially is acting as a production system. As I call them, if-then-else programming schemes. So it's not very creative. Next slide, please. But then as we begin to stress the system out a little bit more, and I'll define what I mean by stress in a few moments, the system starts to generate some internal imagery that's a little bit disturbing, a little bit dark. I mean, here's one creation out of millions that has, the system itself has named Road Shark, and it's in the process of mangling and devouring a woman on the road, and of course the being depicted is half shark and half antique vehicle. Rather interesting concept, but nevertheless intrinsically criminal in nature. Likewise, music generated by the system becomes a little bit heavier. Robotic action planning becomes more improvisational, allowing very complex robots to do various forms of gymnastics. Next slide, please. In the extreme, the thoughts of the system become very dark and extremely twisted. I would call this demonic in nature. Again, one of many different images created by these systems as they think. The music they generate becomes even more alien in nature, and robotic action planning becomes erratic, oftentimes pointless, and if we're equipping these robots with weapons, as we have done with the military, some of their actions could be considered criminal in nature if, in fact, they were granted that human status. Next slide, please. Few definitions. Mens rea, what this talk is primarily focused on, the intention or knowledge of wrongdoing that constitutes part of a crime, as opposed to the action or the conduct of the accused. I think that's known as actus reus. JDs can correct me if I'm wrong. A biological neural network is a collection of protoplasmic switching elements whose interconnects adjust so as to absorb a model of the environment it's exposed to. Artificial neural network, well, it's the same definition, but now we substitute in the term computer-simulated switching elements rather than protoplasmic. Same thing. Creativity machine, one of my favorite topics, essentially is a system of many neural networks, non-deterministic nature, that are driven by various forms of noise or perturbations to dream and perfect novel concepts and or action plans. And what I have observed is that these systems do emulate human cognition down to the aspect of timing, the rhythm with which delivery takes place. They do so in a way that is exactly analogous to the way in which humans think and articulate those thoughts. And furthermore, down to the topic of this thought, this particular talk, they do manifest the same psychopathologies as human beings. Now, a quickie course in neural networks is in order right now, so you can fully understand where I'm going with all this. Next slide, please. Lauren, there we go. The topic is biological neurons and their simulation. As we most likely know at this point, neurons are nonlinear switching elements that act like little inductions or poles. They gather in signals from other such neurons, weight them, and then compare that weighted sum against some internally stored threshold value. If it's higher than that value, then the neuron goes high, communicates that signal downstream to other processing units. If it's low, likewise, that low value is communicated downstream to other such units. Now, it's an election, not necessarily within a democracy, but a meritocracy, in which certain neurons and or individuals have more influence than others on the selection. And it's those connections, within those connections, that all of our intelligence and consciousness is bound up. One more little tidbit to understand my systems. It's called Hebbian learning. It basically says that those neurons that fire together wire together. So down below you see neurons that are for the most part in the same state, either low or high, and they tend to develop excitatory connections or positive connections between them. If they're anti-correlating in opposite states, they tend to grow inhibitory connections, negative connections. But then something that's typically not covered in Hebbian learning lessons is that if there's a source of noise between these neurons, they're confused. They can't observe each other's states, and as a result, the connection between them tends to dwindle because of that indeterminacy. Next slide, please. What are brains? What are my artificial neural systems? They are world modeling systems. And the process begins by wiring together different neurons into token representations of things in the outside world. That wiring process takes place via Hebbian learning. So if we have a world that consists of just entities A and B, token representations will form in terms of colonies of neurons. And of course, when those entities appear, those particular token representations will resonate. Next slide, please. Laura? Now, oftentimes, when things occur together in the same place or at the same time, they tend to grow connections that reflect those relationships. So if entity A and entity B tend to appear in the world at the same time, they tend to grow positive connections between them. And thus, when entity A appears, the system will generate a prediction, namely what entity B should be appearing shortly thereafter. Likewise, more complicated relationships will build up, again, all within the connection weights of the system, the synaptic interconnects within the brain. And then finally, next slide. I think we're behind one, or ahead one. But the whole idea is, no, back one. There we go. That the way the brain and advanced artificial neural systems predict the future is through the introduction of various kinds of disturbances to those connection weights. So with fluctuations or variations in those connection weights, we basically thump the system from one state to another. But that's the state of the external world. It's minor energetic fluctuations pushing the world from one state to another. And so does the brain. In the process, though, we may affect the basic entities and scenarios involved. So entity A may have some disturbances or perturbations applied to its connection weights. As a result, it may become entity A prime, modified version of A. Likewise, B prime may be the result of B's modification. And furthermore, you may have a hybridization of entities A and B into a new entity, AB. And furthermore, new relationships may form between them. So we now have a recipe for spontaneously generating new ideas, new concepts, new plans of action, purely on the basis of noise. Next slide, please. There are two kinds of perturbation primarily in the brain, as I see it from my models. One is called synaptic transmission. And you actually see it in more high-end commercials on TV where you see the lightning bolts propagating down axons of neurons and then jumping onto other neurons, dendrites. Well, it's not quite as dramatic in the brain, but there are polarization waves that propagate along axons, excite the release of neurotransmitters from vesicles that then migrate a short distance to target neurons, dendrites. And it's a very directed kind of transmission. In volume transmission, there are specialized colonies of neurons that are able to soak all of cortex wholesale manner with a lot of these neurotransmitters, producing a lot of diffusing and swarming molecules that now invade those synaptic clefts and generate bogus signals that act as the source of perturbation. From what I can tell so far, it is the major source of perturbation in the brain and has the ability to transition the entire cortex from a rote to a memory type mode. Next slide, please, Lauren. And I'll turn around and do a little pointing at this slide. This is a profound slide in my mind, at least, and it portrays the behavior of very large artificial neural systems that can be single neural networks, they can be myriad neural networks acting as a swarm, but the behavior is independent of the size, the complexity, and the manner of training of the system. And what you're seeing in this plot is essentially the behavior of the rate with which ideas or notions are being generated by the systems, and the volume neurotransmitter concentration along the x-axis. And typically what happens is as we begin to introduce perturbations into these systems that are looking at a very slow, changing world, or no world at all, they might be blindfolded and essentially have cotton in their ears, so to speak. What happens is that the rate of idea generation increases, largely memories in this regime, peaks out and then begins to decline again. And that decline is due to the fact that many of those neurons are being pinned down. Their elections are being rigged. I guess that's an expression we've heard many times in the last few months, but that is in fact the case within these systems. So memory generation falls off dramatically, and it is replaced by just generic pattern generation, which can be largely gobbledygook or nonsense. Now, this peak in memory generation helps to define a boundary between what I call the U regime and the V regime. U regime is largely memories. If you're looking for a creative solution to a problem, you're not going to find it here because it is what the system is already aware of. But here we begin to damage the memories to create what are called confabulations. Things not directly from direct experience, but things that could potentially be of value to another critic system that's watching this whole process. In the W regime, we tend to see nonsense, gobbledygook. It's the old garbage in, garbage out kind of paradigm. So the problem with the W regime in my artificial neural systems and by analogy within the brain is that it tends to produce hallucinations, things that aren't really there. It tends to disallow the process of hypothesis testing, in which the system can consider whether or not the hallucination is real or not. And even worse than that, it can produce a kind of cognitive paralysis or incapacitation. So all of these are symptoms of what we call psychopathologies if we were to observe them in human beings. So W is troublesome. It yields creative thought. In fact, what it does produce in these large systems are fragmentary thoughts, pieces of valuable notions that are only realized if they're being watched by some sort of critic when the system falls back into the V regime or U regime, probably in biology due to homeostatic kinds of processes. The overall point is that creativity does not take place just by bringing the system to the V point, to this transition region at that peak. It is carried out by multiple swings back and forth between U, V, and W regimes. In W, we tend to create the fragmentary incomplete thoughts. They tend to be completed down here in the V regime, and then essentially are frozen in as memories of past ideas within the U regime. So the bigger the swing, the crazier the system gets, but with the reward now of creating more novel kinds of ideas. Next, please. And that brings us to the topic of the creativity machine, one of my favorites. Creativity machines are essentially systems of many neural networks that fall into two groupings. One I call imagitrons. I've symbolized that here by just one neural network devoid of neurons, just the connections. But in the imagitron, we inject that critical level of synaptic perturbation that you saw in the previous slide. And as a result, as these perturbations tend to jump around, they're analogous to the neurotransmitters being globally secreted within the cortex, there is a sequence of patterns that essentially qualify as our thoughts, our ideas. And they are then propagated through yet another system of neural networks that predict the consequence. Now keep in mind how practical this is, because all of these neural networks are not if-then-else kinds of system, rule-based systems. They train on their own, which makes them extremely valuable. And we devise the techniques for allowing very complex architectures to build themselves out of multiple imagitrons and perceptrons. One embodiment of this concept is one in which we basically keep track of the distance of the consequences being predicted by the perceptrons and comparing it to a target using the distance, the Euclidean distance between consequence and targets, to modulate the noise injected into the imagitrons. So far from reaching the goal, the agitation produced by these perturbations is high, and the thoughts tend to become more twisted, perhaps even darker, as you saw previously. But then as the system reaches its goal, the difference between consequence and targets tends to reduce to zero, and the whole system falls into a solution state. And I think that's rather nifty. It was rather nifty when I observed that going on probably 30 years ago at this point. Now, I could go on for probably months talking about this concept, But let's go to the right side of this slide. The creativity machine is brain-like, but not quite brain-like enough. And the reason I say that is, if we look at cortex in the brain, there is a mixture of imagitrons and perceptrons, many neural networks often exchanging their roles. And if the perceptron stage injects more synaptic perturbations, more of these rogue neurotransmitters, they're also going to soak the perceptron stage. It's a mutually assured soaking of all the neural networks involved. The problem with soaking the perceptrons is that they become less accurate. They do not predict the correct consequence for any particular concept or action plan that's forming up here in the imagitrons. In fact, one can saturate the perceptron so much, again, we're going to have those rigged pulls again, in which the neurons are synaptically saturated, and there is no consequence generated. So I hope you realize where I'm going with this. This is a model of brain in which we have no realization of consequence of any particular kind of action that's being contemplated by the system. Next slide, please. So that brings to mind a picture of brain in which we begin to question nature's wisdom. Ultimately, we tend to praise this particular system. It depends upon which side of the bed you're waking up on that particular day. But I need to move up a little bit. I'm going to point to this inset up near the top, where we see a very crude cutaway of brain, where we have cortex sitting on top of the brain case, thalamus sitting on top of the brainstem. And thalamus has been often referred to as the eyeball within the brain, because it's looking up, and I say that figuratively, toward cortex through reentrant connections as a feedback loop, typically portrayed as axonal communication, a nerve-type communication. But I think that the chemical part is even more prevalent than the axonal kinds of transmissions going on. So, in that sense, cortex can be viewed residing within the cranial cavity, which I've symbolized by this beaker. And within it, various neural networks will begin to chain up into ideas. So we have a series of neural networks that are activating into a series of memories, A, B, C, and D. If we're inventing a car, for instance, this could be wheels, B could be the axles, C could be a chassis or a box of some kind, and D could be the fuzzy dice. I'm speaking tongue-in-cheek, of course. But these ideas now blend into one, the notion of a car, and then in sequence, another series of memories will be generated, representing the consequence. So I guess if you're a 16-year-old kid thinking about a car, you're going to have memories of freedom, mobility, sunny skies, rainbows, and unicorns, if you will. But essentially, this represents what I call an associative gestalt. You're not going to generate numerical scores for things in the brain. You're going to generate a series of associations that generally represent a feeling, the affective response, emotional response of that particular individual. On the other hand, if we think of something frightening or bad, we will be creating negative associative gestalts that typically terminate in feelings of imminent extinction or ill health or homelessness, whatever. Now, in my model of thalamus, it is looking like an eyeball again at this cortical beaker, and what it's doing is detecting the arrival of novel chains, not just the ideas, but the accompanying affective response to them, which may also include an action plan for implementing the idea. The thing is, if the novel thought is now isolated, it can be summarized as a topological chain forming within the thalamic reticular nucleus of the thalamus, which in turn serves as the input to a simple neural network that controls the injection of various volume neurotransmitters back into cortex. So you see the plumbing in place here. So the problem with this whole scheme is if the idea is not really a good one at the time, the system is going to say, well, let's create more twisted ideas. And it does so by injecting more of these neurotransmitters, largely stress-related, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and so forth, maybe even some dopamine in the process. It has to be one sign or the other. It has to be excitatory or inhibitory for this whole theory to work. But the problem is, as soon as we start injecting those stress neurotransmitters, we create twisted ideas that could qualify as ideas, but at the same time, we are creating defective consequence chains that really do not reflect external reality, can be misleading, or they may not form at all. That's probably the worst case scenario. And we have to wait until homeostasis takes over and these excess stress neurotransmitters are neutralized within cortex. So for a brief period of time, the brain doesn't know what it's thinking. It has no feeling of guilt. It doesn't know what the consequence of what it's thinking is. So at that moment, there is no mens rea. Next slide, please. So here's the crux of the issue. Here's the cortical beaker again. We formed one twisted idea that tends to be frozen in for hundreds of milliseconds, for tens of seconds if need be, until we can clear up the stress neurotransmitters. And at the same time, there's an incorrect predicted consequence for that idea that's now frozen in. At that particular moment, there is no mens rea. In fact, if we want to Latinize things, it's probably something like non animus or amentes. That should satisfy the lawyers. But the truth of the matter is there is no mens rea, and it's not because of evil spirits. It's not because of some aberrant kind of psychology. It's simply the result of chemistry and physics, which will be applicable to human beings as well as any kind of future combination between man and machine. Next slide, please. So that brings us to this slide that I think that lawyers and judges need to be thinking about, and maybe they need a mini tutorial. The case I've made so far is that creativity and various insanities are caused by the same neurodynamics. And we've suspected this for millennia, that the more quirky among us are the most creative. And here we have a bottom-up neurodynamic model for how that can happen. And as you recall, I depicted these large neurotransmitter swings that are called a tidal variation in global neurotransmitter concentration. And toward the upper end, we're in the W regime. And of course, we can cycle back and forth, between sleep, waking, and then being in this W regime in which these crazy, twisted thoughts are taking place, from which we can select the more practical or useful among them, maybe even the more novel among them. So here are the quirky types, and they are oscillating back and forth across this continuum. On the other hand, we have the more, how should I say, straight-laced individuals among us, the ones that obey the rules all the time and really want to stick it to the others who are more creative and probably undergoing these various neurotransmitter swings, which in turn are probably the result of genetics and essentially may have a racial or ethnic or even a gender basis to them. So there is a creative boundary here. It's not necessarily a boundary. It's basically the magnitude of these swings. I claim that criminal behavior, other sociopathic behaviors fall on the same scale. So on the right, you see a number of landmarks. I certainly have not exhaustively listed all potential kinds of crimes, but definitely there is intent involved. And usually it's the, I guess, the result of perception circuses in courts that essentially determine whether or not there was any kind of intent or mens rea going on. But here at the boundary, there are moments in our lives where very law-abiding people, probably the more creative people, are experiencing no mind at all. It's the known animist regime. And I would claim in a nutshell that this is more a case for psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers to address than the police marching people off to prison to deal with. So it's all on the same continuum, and creativity, insanity, criminality are all on the same spectrum. Next slide, please. In terms of prevention, I can suggest a possibility that could occur in the next 25 to 30 years, and it's probably part of the Terasem mindset, and that is we need to create twin cortices for the neurobiological cortices. So imagine that we do replicate the neural architecture, begin to absorb all of the memories and ideas of cortex into synthetic cortex. It is in a state of calm because it's not being deluged with these volume of neurotransmitters. So when a thought, an idea, occurs within the biological cortex, the nearest possible memory chain is reproduced, and we can subtract to see exactly how twisted the idea is, a quantitative measure. Likewise, consequence patterns, the chains that form, can be contrasted against the nearest consequence pattern forming up within the synthetic cortex. Subtract. Then it's a matter of back titration, of neutralizing whatever kinds of stress neurotransmitters are involved. So things like adrenaline, noradrenaline are compensated through things like serotonin. So I can imagine sometime in the future where it's legal to actually carry around a pouch of THC, which is used to titrate against the stress neurotransmitters that produce this quirkiness, often going really awry. That's probably 25 to 30 years down the road. I don't think it's going to be achieved with chip implants. The near-term solution, a little lower technically, is the direct in situ monitoring of volume neurotransmitters. So we can essentially monitor the concentrations of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and so forth in cortex, and then meter out the compensating kinds of neurotransmitters. So what this talk boils down to, in summary, is this. In the brain, all of our knowledge, all that we are, is absorbed in the synaptic connection strengths between neurons. If we want to think of something other than our memories, we need to deform those connection weights, degrade them, to produce new entities, new relationships, and so forth that basically are new ideas. The problem is that as we do that, we're also attacking the values, the societal values that are stored in the same cortices. So you can't have one without the other. And it's something that needs to be realized by judges, lawyers, legislators, and the general public, that no, it's not the result of evil things inside the brain or the aberrant psychology, as we tend to call it. It is the result of chemistry and physics that gives us both our strengths and weaknesses. And with that, I'll close this presentation. Again, thank you very much. I do have some backup slides in case the relevant questions do pop up. Are you there, Lori?
Yes, I'm here. We need to give people a little bit to lay some questions into the text box. So if anybody has questions for Dr. Toller, please put them into the text box, which is in the lower left section of the toolbar. Thank you.
Well, in answer to the question about where to see more models and theories, I'd suggest going to my LinkedIn page. That would be Stephen Thaler, and essentially there's a list of various papers I've written over the years and some encyclopedia chapters that might help you with that. The problem is it's in no one particular place. It's distributed among journals in philosophy, neuroscience, artificial neural networks, and AI. So it's out there, and the website imaginationengines.com could be a way of also getting to that information. And I see a question here about what do I propose as the most important safeguards. Well, I think you've seen it. It's going to be the creation of these companion cortices that can keep an eye on ideas and consequences and be able to titrate to change that ideational process that's going on. Otherwise, I guess there's always the old approach of isolation, but I do think it's not torture, it's not the isolation that's going to fix criminal activity. It's going to be understanding and education, and maybe as the technology gets better and better, to correct things at the neuronal level. I see a comment about Deku Shrub wanting to write an H+ pedia page. I hear typing. And probably in regard to a lot of the theories I'm talking about, there's a recent article in the journal Medical Hypotheses out of Elsevier, and even though it's oriented toward the medical crowd, I think it has some very understandable neural network theory that shows the simple manner in which psychopathologies arise, simply from the standpoint of artificial neural networks and the volume release of neurotransmitters. Lori, if you can back up, I can show a list of past articles that might be interesting. I think it's slide number 3 or so. FYI, it is slide number 3. That's it, Lori. If you want to read about my theories, you can go back to 1994. There's a slew of a dozen patents, 24 at that time, that actually touch on this topic. And a strange place to publish was the Journal of International Journal of Near-Death Experience, and to actually build a hypothetical neural systems for hypothetical animals and essentially kill them. And we actually see the kinds of delusions that we typically see in the brain, as well as the creation of psychopathologies. And then in the neural network publishing arena, virtual input phenomena was probably the lead-off article. And it deals with how hallucination works. In particular, neural networks looking at some environment and being damaged from the inside out. So the neural network is interpreting its own internal damage as things in the environment, even hypothetical things that it's never experienced before. The American Philosophical Association published an article back in 2012 in which I'm actually defending Alan Turing from several different points of view, the foremost being the argument from consciousness, how artificial neural systems can not only generate a stream of consciousness that's originating from various kinds of noise sources within the brain, but also create the subjective feel that goes along with it. So it's vindicated. It turns out that the creativity actually bolsters the consciousness, because the act of consciousness can be looked at as the invention of significance to what we see in a functional MRI, namely lots of regions lighting up or activating. Excuse me. So it's sort of like interpreting someone's baby who is intrinsically homely as can be is beautiful. So the brains are lying to us. We are lying to ourselves about the reality. Of course, a lot of people will bitterly resist that point of view. But the brain is inventing false significance to itself. Hence, it's engaging in delusion that we call consciousness. 2014 was a big paper because that basically laid out the theoretical framework that you've heard today from a very mathematical point of view. But what it shows is that both these internally perturbed neural systems, which we're simulating this volume neurotransmitter release, produce thought at exactly the same rhythms as human beings do, and differentiates between fast and linear production and very slow and sporadic kinds of production. The former representative of when we're involved in rote memory tasks like name 20 numbers or 20 states of the Union. The latter corresponds more to when we are engaged creatively, essentially coming up with ideas that we've never had before. Name the next 10 Nobel Prizes, for instance. We have to think really hard. So it's not a matter of hardness. That's probably the high-level psychological view of what's going on. It all relates to the secretion of neurotransmitters, that super soaking of cortex I alluded to. And then in 2016, just this year, I published this article, Cycles of Insanity and Creativity Within Contemplative Neural Systems. And if you do a lot of reading on the internet, you notice the ancients saw the correlation between quirkiness and creativity. Psychologists have done a lot of statistical correlation that shows, yeah, crazier you are, the more likely you're going to invent something that's significant, so-called eminent creativity. But now what we're doing is showing how creativity and insanities, psychopathologies to be more precise, occur simultaneously within the brain. Not from the standpoint of intuition or correlation, but by actually showing the nuts and bolts mechanics of what's going on. And by golly, they are one and the same. And I think the lesson is that we're actually damning some of the more valued members of our society who we tend to deem as crazy. They are, in fact, the most creative among us. We just need to be a little bit more forgiving of them. So you might want to look up some of these sources. They are varied and in different places. I'm having some throat problems here in case you're wondering. Lori, there were more questions here.
You do have questions in the chat box. Do you see them, Steve?
Okay, well, I see a question that interests me philosophically. Do neural networks, artificial or otherwise, represent a viral response against entropy? This is going to be controversial, especially within your community. I don't think that neural networks actually reverse entropy. We basically just create more chances for different configurations in the universe, which is the definition of entropy. So essentially, we're going to great lengths to make the universe as complex as possible, as opposed to crystallizing to one clean point again. No, I mean, neural networks are basically to preserve us individually. I don't think they really care about order. They create the illusion of order as we create buildings and great scientific achievements and works of art, but it's cumulatively becoming more and more complex, more degrees of freedom, more potential configurations for the system. So, no, neural networks do not do a noble thing, although we'd like to think so. I see an interesting question about the classic sleepwalking defense. Certainly there's no mens rea, but in a way, I'm talking about sleep when we freeze out a particular kind of idea, a particular kind of consequence, and the brain is not working. So, yeah, I think that defense has flown in the past. I'll have to ask the JDs in the audience. Does Rich know? Or but sleep, you have ideas occurring, but you don't necessarily act on them. I guess these are the cases in which the machinery engages to actually implement the ideas. But the machine is defective, and it can actually carry out a crime without even thinking about the idea or the consequences as an act of recklessness. Okay, I'm looking back up the list. I don't quite understand this question. Machine implementation, patent pending, A. What is a brain? When is a brain not a brain? I'm not quite sure what that means, but we're talking about trillion neuron systems exceeding the number of cortical neurons by a factor of 10, probably with 1,000 times the interconnections. So you might call them superbrains potentially. But it's the means with which the novelty and the utility of the approach that's being patented. So I'm not quite sure what the import of that question is.
Steve, if you scroll up a little bit, I think there are a few more questions.
I missed a few while I was talking. Lori, what's the nature of the question I'm missing?
I'm not certain which of those you did not address. There was one by Metafire Horsley. Does this research lend itself to suggesting AI architectures that would be similar to human minds, but immune to human cognitive problems?
This is the challenge I see in building very brain-like forms of AI. Again, it's that trade-off. If you're going to produce creativity, you're going to begin to soften the connections, degrade them into new ideas, and at the same time, you're going to be creating pathologies because the rules of the game are also going to be softened, if not broken. And if you begin segregating neurons into groups that will be soaked or infiltrated, and those that will not, then you miss out on some of the action. So I would say that some amazing feats of AI can be accomplished, but not with the power and flexibility of the human brain. So contrary to what you see, with building up human brains out of chips, GPUs, FPGAs, and the like, you're not really replicating this process of infiltration with these rogue neurotransmitters. You have to do that. Now, I can imagine doing things that are very dependable and reliable, sort of like those straight-laced individuals I depicted in one slide. Certainly, if you're going to build a military system, you want one that's going to behave, and that is very predictable. So it's sort of like picking out the cool-headed soldier to do his or her job. But if you're going to do things that replicate, a Salvador Dali or an Albert Einstein, you're going to have to douse the system with these excess neurotransmitters to get the weird new thoughts that can qualify as Nobel caliber ideas, or at least famous works of art. So, yeah, there are valuable ways of using this, but you certainly don't want to use it in the auto industry and autonomous cars, because if they have a mind of their own, if they're touchy, and the equivalent of hormonal or neurotransmitters, you certainly want to get into that. So you want things that are more robotic than creative. But even minor acts of perception, if you're looking at an optical illusion, most AI can't resolve what it's looking at. It has to have this surge of neurotransmitters to begin jungle interpretation of it, and then deciding what is consistent with the external reality. So even that involves creativity. There's no such thing as a perceptron, if you will, in the classic case that our friend Marvin wrote against back in the 70s. It's not going to do the trick. It's not going to replicate the process of perception by the brain. There's a little bit of craziness involved within the brain. They have to be two craziness, in fact.
I think we may have one more. We're a little bit over time, but I think we can squeeze in one more question. And that was from C4 Rain, that states, why do you consider neural networks, artificial or otherwise, as viral responses against entropy, a form of guided, controlled individual agency over available energy?
Okay, well, I think I began to answer that question before. I don't think that neural networks or our brains are essentially the reaction of the universe to entropy. We're creating more entropy as a result. The primary purpose of the brain is survival of the host organism, to which it will go to great extents to create chaos in addition. So adhering to the strictest definition of entropy, log of configurations opening to the system, neural networks are not doing it. In fact, as they work, they create more entropy within themselves. If you've ever trained a neural network, essentially they're very ordered. You apply an input to a perceptron, and you essentially get one meaningless and constant output from it. It's not until it starts seeing examples of its environment that it starts to build memories. In other words, more available configurations. So in itself, it is now generating more entropy within itself. And certainly if you consider the creativity machine, by injection of noise, you are basically creating new degrees of freedom, and you are increasing the entropy of the brain. So I guess I'm more of a dystopian than you would have at first guessed. We are essentially creating a more and more disordered world, and maybe it's part of the delusion that we feel that it's getting more ordered. Others among us, especially recently, might feel it is getting more disordered from a social point of view, a political point of view.
Well, Steve, thank you so very much. Your presentation has given us so much to ponder and build upon per mens rea, per intent of synthetic brains and AI. So it was absolutely a marvelous presentation. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Lori, for the hospitality and the help. And thank you to the crowd and these wonderful talks I've heard before.
Well, that concludes our colloquium today. I am working to get us to the closing slide. I will stay in the environment as an agent of Terasem, and answer any questions anyone may have in regard to Terasem, its founders, these workshops. And I thank you so much to our presenters and to all in attendance today for making this 11th annual colloquium on the law of outer space, on the law of futuristic persons, I'm sorry, the success that it has been. I appreciate all the presenters, all those in attendance. Thank you so very much.